Okay, I'll say something. It's probably going to be awkward. I don't know how else to do it, but
it's okay, man.
I got to do it. Hey, Grace Community Church. I'm excited to be able to do this, what I'm about to do here, especially in light of yesterday's sermon on the Great Commission about going and making disciples of all the nations. I'm excited to do a couple of interviews, and I'm going to interview some of the missionaries that are either supported by our church or from our church. Today, I'm talking with Joe Barnes in Puno, Peru, and Joe and Jhon Chavez are. You have to tell me the name of the church again, because I can never remember what all the letters stand for.
Reformed Baptist Church of Puno is the translation.
Okay, the Reformed Baptist Church of Puno. And this is a church that started a year ago?
Almost 2 years ago. In April, it'll be 2 years.
Wow. Okay. So, but this is a church that started 2 years ago directly from y'all's labors there in Puno, Peru. Is that right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And when did y'all actually leave? Because y'all were the first missionaries that we sent out officially from Grace Community Church. So when was that? That was 5 years?
I think 2017, around June or July, when we first left. Yeah, and we've been in Puno since 2019.
So I'm excited that we get to have this conversation, because I want to encourage the church towards missions. I want to encourage our church specifically, just to know what's going on with our missionaries and how we can pray for y'all, how we can support y'all. Well, Joe, why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me how you ended up in Peru, how you came to know the Lord, things like that.
Yeah, well, I'm Joe Barnes. As Jake said, a missionary sent out by Grace Community Church in Jackson, Mississippi. My wife's name is Laurel. She's from Oklahoma. I'm from Mississippi. We have 2 children, Joseph, who is 6, and who is 4. And I'm a missionary in Puno, Peru, and a pastor of the church that Jake mentioned that we were able to plant a couple of years ago. Puno, Peru is in the southern part of Peru. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Lake Titicaca. It's a pretty famous lake. I think it's the largest lake at the highest elevation in the world. And Puno is also pretty close to the border of Bolivia. So that's where we're working. I came to know the Lord when I was, I think, 17 or 18 years old. I can't quite remember. I was in high school or ending high school, and there were two young guys who were visiting my church, and I wasn't a Christian at this time. I didn't have interest in being in church, but my parents made me go. And with these 2 guys that were visiting the church, it caught my attention because they're not guys that you would see at church. And I began talking to them. I knew a little bit about their life and what they did, and they had come to Christ. And I could see a pretty radical change in their life, and just all that caught my attention. And so they studied the Bible with me, and after a couple of months of just studying the scriptures and reading, I think Romans 5, God used that passage to show me that I was really foolish if I just kept going down the road that I was traveling, because I was going to go to hell. And I had a lot of hate and anger in my heart towards God because of some things that had happened in the past. And really, if I could express how my heart was in that season, it was I wanted to take God off his throne. But God used some things I was reading in Romans to show me how foolish that was, and that my destiny was set. So it was either submit to Christ or, pay the consequence. And God gave me a new heart, and trusted in him when I was 17 or 18. So.
Oh, wow. How did you find yourself in Puno, Peru, and what made you want to, let me ask you this first before we get there. What made you want to be a missionary? So you get saved when you're 17. Was that like an immediate desire, or was that something that the Lord grew over time?
Yeah, when I came to know the Lord, there was always a lot of zeal to want to share the gospel, probably some misguided and unhealthy zeal in the way I was doing it, but I just wanted to share Christ with everyone. And then in the church that I was a member in before Grace Community Church, even in that church, I thought that I felt maybe like a call to ministry. I just wanted to serve God, in other words, which every Christian should want to do, right? Mm-hmm. And then when Grace Community Church started, there was a pretty heavy emphasis on reaching the nations. I don't know if you remember, Jake, but I don't know if it was the first sermon series or the second, but Ryan and Dustin preached through Philippians. Mm-hmm. And Philippians has a missions theme in it, and that just grabbed my heart. And there was one sermon in particular, I can't even tell you much about it, but it's at the end of Philippians, and one of them were preaching about how the gospel even reached the household of Caesar. And it was like, people like that, you think, well, the gospel, yes, it's powerful, it can save lives, but it's never going to reach, the household of Caesar. It's never going to reach, the Communist Party of China. And they were just brothers talking about that sermon. Why not? Why can the gospel not reach, the hardest people to reach, the hardest heart? Why can it not convert the hardest heart? So that really gripped me. And from that moment, I was just, I have to go. I have to go. So I was praying about going somewhere. Didn't know where I wanted to go or where God would call me to go, is I guess the better way to put it. I think there was a brother, his father-in-law ran oil company or oil rigs in Saudi Arabia or something like that. I was considering that maybe that's a way in to share the gospel with Muslims. But in that time, there was a sister named Stephanie Gordon now, but it was Stephanie Brand at the time. And she invited myself and others to go on a trip with her to Peru. And while we were in Peru, Jhon Chavez, who was my partner, he was visiting Peru at the same week to go to his sister's wedding. And he could speak English and Spanish during that time. And he ended up translating the gospel for me as an unbeliever. And that's kind of how our relationship began there. And then we came back to the States. Jhon flew back to Arizona where he was living. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned, we took a trip to Peru. I don't know if I said Peru or not.
This was the wedding. This was John's sister's wedding.
John's sister's wedding in Tacna, Peru. So Stephanie previously had lived in Peru. Sorry, I'm leaving the details out here. Stephanie had previously lived in Peru, and she was going to take a trip back to Peru to go to this wedding, John's sister's wedding. And we met at the wedding, Jhon.
And Jhon is co-pastoring the Reformed Baptist Church in
Puno. Right. He's co-pastoring with me right now. So we all moved back to the States, and Jhon reaches out because he was convicted by the things that he was heard. He thought he was a Christian. He realized that he wasn't. And then, to make a long story short, he moves to Mississippi, starts coming to Grace Community Church, and about 6 months in, comes to know the Lord. And then I was still going to go to another country, but Jhon began to say, well, why not Peru? And Jhon and I became really good friends, really close. And he was urging me to go with him to Peru. We began praying about it. God led us to come to Peru. How we got to Puno specifically was we had just heard from some other missionaries. We were working in Cajamarca, Peru for a couple of years with some Presbyterian churches until we knew where we wanted to go. And some other missionaries told us that Puno, Culiaca, and this region, just you couldn't find a healthy church anywhere. So we came here, we tried to investigate, and as best as we could find out, that didn't seem like there was healthy churches here, and that's pretty much the case. So here we are in Puno.
Man, and Puno, for people who don't know, the elevation of Puno, Peru it's pretty high up there, correct?
It's like 12,000 something feet. I don't know the exact.
For reference, where am I in Mississippi? What's how far above sea level am I? Probably not much.
Probably not much. I don't really know, but I would just say sea level, basically.
Yeah.
Probably.
So you're up 12,000 feet from what you're used to, in other words.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
yeah, it's pretty tough at times.
So a little bit about Puno, kind of what are some of the challenges that you faced being here in Puno? Maybe say, let's leave the current situation out for just a minute and
Okay.
say early on, like what have been some of the challenges of being in Puno, and maybe even give a little bit of context of what's the religious background in Puno.
Okay. Right. Specifically to Puno, and that's a different question than saying Peru, just because Peru is multicultural, 7 different ecosystems. You have the coast, the mountains, the jungle. So anywhere you go in Peru, the context and the culture and the ministry situations and ministry context is very different. But Puno specifically, yeah, the elevation is difficult. I mean, I don't know who all knows about John's blood issue, but he has a blood issue with like his cell count being too high, even being at a dangerous level. So they're only going to be able to be here for so many years before they will have to move. People in this part of the country in Puno are very reserved. They're very closed, and they're not going to open themselves up to you unless there's a lot of trust. So that's a pretty big challenge. The people here are pretty hard-hearted and cold towards others. There's not a love your neighbor as yourself idea in the culture like you might have in the South. And I'm not saying the South is perfect, but generally the South in the United States has been affected by Christian culture. So people generally, sometimes men will open the door for an old lady who's going in the store. Here, men will just knock an old lady over in the street because they're trying to pass by. So people really don't think in one another here. They pretty much care about themselves. And that's a pretty big challenge. Another challenge in the church is no one shows up on time. That's pretty common unless it's to your job, and you'll be penalized for showing up late. Most people will show up to church 10 minutes late, sometimes 30 minutes late. And we've kind of come to a place now where we have to talk to people, hey, we're doing this for the name of Christ. This is greater than our cultural differences. So this isn't a foreigner saying, hey, you need to show up on time. This is, hey, we need to show up on time for Christ. So those are a few challenges that we face here in Puno specifically.
So what kind of religious background is there? Like, what are you I guess what's the prevailing religious culture that you have there?
Well, obviously you have Catholicism in all of Latin America, and there's a pretty strong presence of that here in Puno, but it's very cultural. Most people here are not dedicated to Catholicism. Some are, but most not. But the interesting thing about Puno is you have the Andean culture. And before Francisco Pizarro and the Spaniards came in and took over the Incan Empire, the Andean region was a very pagan area. So child sacrifice in some communities, offerings to the earth so that, they would have a good harvest when harvest time comes. So that is still very strong. Obviously not child sacrifice and things like that, but in the communities in the countryside, they will still have their rituals and their ceremonies, and they'll offer animals or the hearts of animals to the earth. And even still today. And that's really in the Ayamaiden, what's known as the Ayamaiden people group. It's very strong, and you have the Quechua people, and the Quechua really is a mix of all the Andean peoples, pre-conquistador, pre-Incan, really. And so that's all mixed together. But the Ayamaiden people group here have preserved their culture. They've preserved their language. The young people in the Ayamaiden people group still speak Ayamaiden fluently.
Oh, wow.
On the Quechuan side, it hasn't been preserved. So people's parents might speak Quechua, but the younger generation mostly doesn't. So I say all to say, those pagan practices are still very strong here in Puno. And so you kind of have three, I guess, religious categories. They're not categories, but just to understand how things are here. You have people who practice Catholicism, you have people who practice paganism, and then you have some people who mix them together.
Right.
And,
kind of a very superstitious Catholicism, right?
Right. And the pagan practices in the past decade have really affected Christians here. There's been a lot of persecution towards Christians who do not participate. A lot of the communities, the whole community is obligated to participate in whatever they're doing. And if you don't, there's a brother in our church. When he was a boy, he can remember his father being beaten in the street, being stoned in the street a few times for not participating. Or they won't buy from you. They'll shut your business down if you don't participate. It's less. The intensity is less now than it was before, but there's still persecution to Christians in the Mayan culture. So,
wow. Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the unique challenges then that you face there in Puno that maybe are different than the rest of the world, or missions maybe somewhere else?
Well, like I mentioned before, the Mayan people are very closed. They don't really want to talk with you at all unless you can find a way to break the ice. So I've learned a few phrases in Aymara, and when I say those, it kind of throws them off, and they'll open up a little bit, talk. Because
is that just because, like, oh wow, this guy's talking in my language?
I think if someone from another part of Peru was speaking their language, there would be probably just a shock. But the fact that I'm white and I'm from another country, they don't expect it at all. So it kind of opens the door to be able to talk with some people. So that's a big challenge. The Aymayan culture is prideful and strong and wants to preserve who they are, and they don't want anyone to encroach upon it. So Christianity is a threat, in other words. Catholicism is a threat in their minds. So that's definitely the biggest challenge in that community. It's similar here with the Catholicism as in the Bible Belt. You know, you have to convince people they're not saved before you convince them that they need to know Christ. So it's the same here. It's just from the angle of Catholicism. You have to show people that, you know, they're trusting in their flesh and trusting in their works. And sometimes that can be a challenge because you show them, but then it's like it went right over their head. So
right.
It's a matter of God's Spirit, you know, opening their heart to see.
Now, in your church specifically, do you have Ayamitans, Quechua, and former Catholics, I guess, all in your church?
We have a mix. We have a pretty strong presence of brothers from the Aymayan community, and then I think some will probably have family members who are Catholics. Then we have one or two people from the Quechuan community.
So I guess this is going to lead into some of the rest of this that I was going to ask you about. Right now, there's a lot of political unrest in Peru. Right. And it is kind of divided along some of those people group lines, correct?
Right.
And so I guess now we're talking, you've got Ayamitans and you've got the Quechua peoples in your church. You've got whatever others might call themselves. Are there any issues directly from the political unrest that are kind of bubbling up within your own church?
You mean as far as affecting members, or as far as maybe causing division or differences of opinion?
Yeah, maybe however you want to answer that question. Like, is it affecting your members? I'm asking specifically about members in your church. Like, have there been kind of people using those talking points that are happening on the streets, and it's causing division within your church?
So far, and you know, thanks to God, there's not been any division. There has been. It's obvious there is some difference of opinion, but I think most people in our church are at least at the point of maturity where they know, hey, going out into the street and destroying people's property, or beating other people in the street for no reason is unacceptable, and according to the scriptures. So I think everybody agrees there. But then as far as what are the root problems, the root issues, or what needs to happen, what needs to change, there are definitely some different ideas. But I think most of the church is on the same page. Most of the church, because many in our church have experienced, before this unrest right now, they've experienced a 20-year civil war in Peru, which is the root of what's happening right now. So a lot of them already understand, hey, we've already gone down this path. This isn't the answer to our problems.
So when did that 20-year civil war end?
Around year 2000, more or less.
Okay, so that's really recent history then.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you give, just for people who don't know, I know you and I have just kind of talked about this a little bit, but give it like in a nutshell, if you can describe what the biggest issue is or what's causing this political unrest. Why don't you just explain the unrest? Maybe some people don't even know there's unrest going on in Peru right now.
Right. Wow, it's such a complicated topic. How to put it in a few words is difficult. Basically, because of things that have happened in the past, you have a pretty large division in Peru between the coast and the Andean region, the mountains. And the mountainous region would be made up of farmers, people, they're called the campesino, the people who live in the countryside. And then the people in the city, are more industrial, have more money. It's similar to the issues that we're seeing in the States. So think of the same story in the States, the same kind of political divide that we have right now, but in a different context. And so there's real issues that have happened in the history of Peru, like the Spaniards who've come in, they abused the native people. And so that division goes way back. And so right now there's just long-term consequences from all the things that have happened in the past. What has happened as of recent is a man from the indigenous communities was the president. And since he has taken office, Congress and this man named Pedro Castillo, who was an indigenous president, basically, they've been at war. So Congress has been trying to impeach him, and he's been trying to dissolve Congress. And it's just been a political war since he's taken office. Finally, what has happened is Pedro Castillo abused his constitutional powers and tried to dissolve Congress, which then gave the government the power to remove him from office and put him in jail because what he did was technically illegal. So now all the people on that side of the divide who were in favor of Pedro Castillo were very upset.
And this is the indigenous peoples. That would be the indigenous peoples, right?
The indigenous peoples, or the people from the Andean region, the mountain region. It's kind of hard to clump everybody together because there's definitely different groups and different perspectives, but most of those people were in favor of him. So they feel as if what was ours was taken from us, although it was done legally. That they feel that it was an attack on them, and so other political leaders, potentially terrorist groups, even political leaders in Bolivia, all with their own agendas, are amplifying the division and throwing gas on the fire, and have got all these people fired up. And so it's difficult to say whose motives are right or whose motives are wrong, but people have gone to the streets to protest. And then you've got other wicked people who are using the crisis to their advantage, and in the night they're breaking into grocery stores and stealing everyone. And the people who are protesting are being blamed for it. So it's just a lot of chaos right now.
Wow. So how is that affecting you guys? Like specifically your family and your
right. Well, my family specifically, it's a little difficult to travel to the city. We're pretty much here at the house. If I go out, I've been going out on a bicycle or walking. Most of the roads during the week, they are roadblocks, and they're very organized. So people take shifts. and we'll man these roadblocks. And if motorcycles usually can pass, you can pass on a bike or pass walking, but if a car or a truck or any kind of transportation tries to pass through, they'll stop you and they'll stone the car. They've stoned the ambulances, and children have even died who needed to go to the hospital and couldn't make it. They busted the windows out of an ambulance. Wow. So they won't let anyone pass whenever they have their roadblocks. So it's affecting our family in that way. Of course, that's affecting all of Puneños, all Peruvians here. And then specifically in our church, it's affecting people who have businesses. We have a few members who depend on their businesses each week just to eat. And if you have a shop or a business and you open it when the people want to protest, they potentially will come and beat you in the street for it. They potentially will come in and steal all your things out of your shop or burn your shop down. We have one brother who he has a business here in Puno, but also a business in Culiaca, and the association there. If you do not shut your business down or you do not participate in the protests, they'll give you a fine, a daily fine, and they add them up. And then if you don't pay it, they'll probably just take all your things from you. So you're forced to participate or suffer the consequences if you're a business owner. So that's really affecting some of our members.
I'm just curious about him. Is he paying the fine or?
As of now, no, but I think his fine is probably growing larger each day.
Wow. And you mentioned, this was offline, but you mentioned that there was a sister who has a store in your church who explained kind of how she was having to do business.
The stores here, they'll have like a metal door, kind of like a garage door, but it's thicker and stronger and it drops down. And in this door, there's a smaller door that you can enter and exit through. So they'll shut the large door. She'll shut the large door and she'll open the smaller door and she'll go out on the street. As people pass by, she'll try to do business. But in the moment she can hear protesters, or in the moment she sees a group coming, she'll go back inside of her store and shut that small door as she wasn't there. Or when there's protests going on, as she's tried to come home, she's hiding behind objects and trying to avoid the crowds to get home so that she's not persecuted, because when she passes by, they call for her to join. And if she doesn't join, they potentially will attack you for not joining them. So that's the reality of her life right now.
And as of the time in which we're recording this, you said today is probably the worst. They're predicting that it would be the worst day for protests.
Well, there was rumor that today was going to be worse than, I guess it was last Monday when we had all the chaos. But there's also rumor that everyone was going to travel to Lima. And I think that's what's happening. I think people are traveling to Lima, which means it should be pretty calm here in Puno.
So how has this affected your ministry? Specifically, how are you thinking through pastoral issues, especially within your local church?
Right. Well, I think it in one sense, it opens the door for ministry, because it's not only an opportunity to help our members find their hope and their trust in Christ in the middle of this crisis, but it's open, I think, will open doors to other people who have no hope at all. And their hope is the government, or their hope is that the police would show up, or their hope is that no one comes and burns down their store. So I think it's just opened up more opportunities to share the gospel. My son and I were able to go take cookies to the police station. The people here speak very evil of the police, and the police have done wicked things. Right now, the police are the ones maintaining the peace in the city. So we went there, we went and shared the gospel with them and told them that we were thankful, and we know that your lives are in danger every day, but apart from Christ, you have no true protection. You have no hope. And tomorrow, your life might end because of your service to to the city and to Peruvians. So it's opened doors like that. And they were pretty receptive. They were very thankful that we just came and gave them cookies because everyone else was spitting at them and yelling at them and things like that. So in a general way, to answer the question, I think it's opened more doors to point people to Christ as being the only hope for their souls.
So how would you, we're kind of wrapping up the interview here, but how would you encourage someone towards the mission of God? Take that how you want to take it. Encourage me how you want to encourage me. How would you encourage someone towards the mission of God?
Well, first, I just think it's just helpful to see that the scriptures make it pretty clear that everyone is to participate in the mission of God, not just the missionary. And most people know, John Piper's quote on missions, there's senders, there's goers, and there's the disobedient. So if God's not calling you to be a missionary, then you're a sender. But the main way in which you ought to think about sending is through your local church. I'm not discouraging anyone from personally supporting a missionary friend or a missionary sent out by another church. I'd be glad if they do that. But I think primarily if you're not considering becoming a missionary because God's calling you to do so, then whatever church you're a part of, go to your pastors and say, who are we supporting as missionary? Or what missionaries are we supporting? How can I help? How can I know more about their ministry to pray? And maybe their church isn't supporting any missionaries, and it's a good opportunity for them to speak with their pastors about obeying the Great Commission. So I think that's the primary thing, is thinking about how do I help other missionaries as a sender, and primarily through my local church, because the mission belongs to the church, not to individuals, not to missionaries, but the church is the sending organization of the mission of God. So.
Yeah, amen. We're going through Philippians with our boys, or we just finished going through Philippians with our boys. So you mentioned that earlier. I don't know if that was online or offline, but one of the things that he mentions is how the Philippians had partnered with him in the gospel,
right?
And how encouraged he was at them doing that. And so, kind of, my final question to you is, how can people partner with you in the gospel? I know specifically in Philippians, there was a monetary side to that, where they were supporting him. They were funding him, providing for his needs. And so how can people support missionaries like you and missions just in that part of the world?
Well, if I know there could be different audiences to this video. If you're a member at Grace Community Church and you want to partner with our family or the Chavez family, you could just go speak with one of the elders, and they can help you in that. If you're not a part of Grace Community Church and you want to learn more about our ministry, you could look for me on Facebook and contact me. Joe and Laurel Barnes is our Facebook name. Or if you just want to support us, you could go to ripeforharvest.org. And on that website, you can find all of the missionaries and all the information as far as how to partner and give. Our church here in Puno, and primarily me as a pastor, will be in an informal way partnering with a ministry called Peru Center for Law and Justice. And this ministry is in another part of Peru, but they just began a branch here in Puno. And what they do is they represent people before the law who don't have money to hire or pay for a lawyer. In the justice system, in the legal system in Peru, there's a lot of corruption. A lot of judges are paid under the table. And this ministry, what it seeks to do is help people who don't know Christ, or help other people who are Christians who have no representation before the law, but with the goal of sharing the gospel with them. So they're required to meet with a pastor or someone who can give them biblical counseling and can share the gospel with them. So that's where our church will come in here in Puno, is we'll give biblical advice to the lawyers as far as what the scriptures say about justice and the law and things like that. And then as they have I don't know the right word, I don't want to say clients, but as they help individuals, they will connect those individuals with us so that we can meet with them and share Christ with them. And I'm trying to raise support so that this ministry can function and run here in Puno. So you could just contact Jake and he could help you get in touch with me if you'd like to hear more about that. That's not a ministry like this, Mercy Ministries. They're not the primary way in which we complete the mission, but I think they have a role in coming alongside the local church, like Peru Center for Law and Justice is going to do with us, with our local church here in Puno. So that's another way you could help.
Man. Well, and I just thought about this. Your brother is a lawyer. I don't know if you've had any conversations with him.
Some, yes.
There you go. Well, Joe, man, this is awesome. This has been really a pleasure. And man, we're praying that the Lord would, first of all, bless your ministry, that the Lord would be honored and glorified where you're at, and that the Lord would keep you guys safe and would just give y'all a whole lot of wisdom, especially in this unique climate in Peru right now. So we're going to keep praying for y'all. And, our Tuesday nights are always praying for you guys. And so I just want to thank you for sitting down and talking to me.
All right. Thank you, brother. Love you guys.